Hi, this is going to be a brief summary of Pathwork Lecture 193. There will be some differences. One is that I am playing with virtual backgrounds, which is the double rainbow that recently appeared over New York City after a major storm a few weeks ago. It's the digital equivalent of dyeing your hair. I decided to have some fun. So I'm just going to change them according to my mood because many of us are quarantined or isolated and we're looking for a little bit of entertainment wherever we can find it. Pathwork Lecture 193 is the basic resume of the basic principles of Pathwork. And I began this in December and bit off more than I can chew and realized that there was so much material just referenced lately in that lecture that trying to even cover it as a review in a single month was unrealistic. So by the end of the month, I took the last section that I had tried to condense and expanded it into January of 2020. So today I'm going to go over some of the basic principles in that section that I did in January. And I'm going to try to be lighthearted about it. I'm going to treat this as a game, as something you can do because you're bored or you have spare time. It's a fun way to do things. There's no particular reason to be deadly serious about all of this. The guide encourages the use of humor. I find that when people can laugh a bit, when they can accept the humor in a paradox or a given situation, it indicates to me that they really get it. They're not attached to it. It's not life or death, must have it. They're more willing to see the insanity of the trying to go in two different directions at once, trying to achieve the impossible. And once we laugh at it, then it indicates that it has less import. It has less it grabs us less than it did when we were in it. I don't quite know how else to explain it. So let me give you some examples. One of the first lectures that was mentioned, and the guide will mention it almost in passing, and sometimes you can get the lecture reference from his suggestion, and other times it's a bit oblique. So I tend, part of what my study guides do is I try to bring those to the surface so people can say, oh, I'm interested in this, and they'll know where to go, instead of it being oblique and you just don't realize what the guide was referring to. So one of the ones he referred to is 3 levels of reality, which is Pathwork Lecture 162. And the 3 levels are what you think exists, what actually exists, and then what can happen if you're going to address reality, what does exist, instead of what you think exists. So it's like, I tried to describe these triads, and the guide's very, very fond of triads. I try to describe these triads as a 3-legged stool. So you can work with 2 of them, but it's more secure if you have 3. You have a more settled sense of reality when you've got 3 access points. So think of these 3 points: what I think exists, what actually exists, and what is possible, as 3 legs of a stool. Now here's where it gets tricky. And when I teach this, I'm working with real people in real situations, and they're giving me real-time feedback. So when I do these presentations, I'm a little abstract. I'm not speaking specifically about a given situation as an example. But what I think exists is the equivalent of my perception of the universe, which is interesting. It is also my perception, not necessarily your perception or her perception or his perception or their perception. But we don't realize that. We think we see reality as it is, and we make successive interpretations based on the presumptions that what we see is real, without realizing that it's what we interpret that we are actually seeing. So there are various anecdotal examples of this. Eyewitness accounts is one of them. Everybody sees things differently. Different things stick in your head, so you remember them, but not others. So when we talk about 3 levels of reality, people want to go through all 3. My suggestion is stick with the first one first. In other words, go deeper rather than broader, and consider, what does it mean when everything you see is only your perception of what is happening, and that you may or may not actually be seeing what is happening. So I'm going to slip into game mode here. I can talk about this abstractly, or we can get concrete. My suggestion is this: it is used, this human aberration, this eccentricity about human beings, is used all the time in literature, in film, movies, presentations. You can watch it on the news, where one person is saying, this is what's happening, and the other person is saying, no, this is what's happening. And they're at loggerheads. There's no agreement here. They're describing 2 different realities. And they're absolutely adamant. This is what is real. My invitation to you is to begin noticing the concept that we're all speaking from inside a certain bubble, a certain point of view. So that when I speak, I'm speaking of what I see, and what you speak is what you see, and it may or may not match. I describe this as building muscles, spiritual muscles, perceptive muscles, skills. And it's a little bit, I do this thing. This is probably going to go wonky because of the virtual background, but we'll see how it does. I describe this as calisthenics, and I use my fingers to describe calisthenics, to get the point across that what we're doing here is building muscles. Now, here's the joke about my doing this with my fingers. The first time I intuitively started doing this, I did it for about 30 seconds, and my fingers ached so badly it almost made me scream. You wouldn't think that that would happen, but this takes muscles that you don't normally operate at this speed. These muscles are not set up to do this. So then the next time I did it, it was a little bit easier. I've been doing this now for 20 years as an example, and I'm really good at it. I can do this for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I don't get tired. I still lack coordination, so it's not elegant. But my muscles don't get as tired as they used to, because I have developed those muscles. I have activated those muscles. They know what to do. They're used to doing it. The pattern is more familiar to me. I don't have to concentrate on telling the muscles up, down, sideways. I don't have to step through all these things. I can multitask. I can talk and do this silly finger movement. That's a skill. Patting your head and rubbing your tummy, or vice versa, whatever that is, I cannot do it, is also a skill. It is hard for some people and easy for others. Understanding that what you see in the world is only one aspect, one possibility, is a skill. Imagine that what you're trying to do is you're trying to see your limitations. Here's another example. If you're wearing blinders, meaning that you have limited what you are able to see by trauma, preference, belief system, doesn't really matter. But you have limited your capacity to see because there's something out here, out beyond my hands, that threatens you. And so to make yourself feel safe, you limit your ability to perceive that. Then you will only see what you feel safe seeing, or the section of life that you can handle, because the wider view, the peripheral vision, makes you nervous. That becomes so ingrained that we don't realize we're wearing blinders. So when we look at 3 levels of reality, even that first step, it's about realizing that you're wearing blinders, that you're using them, that for various reasons you have eliminated options, perceptions, possibilities from being real. And so you don't even think about them anymore. They are invisible to you. In this work, they've got to become more visible. The whole idea is to raise our awareness of everything and reconsider. Now, in real life, not seeing everything is useful. If you see everything, it's overwhelming. So we learn to focus. We focus our eyes. We even focus our ears. You're aware of the phenomenon that if you record something in a room, you'll hear random noise and you won't be able to pick out the speaker that when you're in the room, you can pick out the speaker. We actually have the ability to tune our ears without rotating them like a cat or a dog. We have an ability to weed out sounds we don't want to pay attention to and focus on the sound that we want to hear. Try this. Try this in a crowded room, in a crowded situation. Notice how you can focus on hearing a person across the room. And once you focus on that, you can hear them far more clearly than when they were just one of many noises in the room. Becoming aware is becoming aware of the choices we make instead of those choices being invisible so that we cannot revisit them. So 3 levels of reality. First level is what we perceive as real. The second is what is real. Now that's all relative because no one really knows the truth. As human beings, we do not know the technical reality of the truth of our planet. We don't have the ability to see every wavelength. We don't have the ability to see every dynamic interaction. We don't have the knowledge. Even scientists do not have the knowledge to explain everything. So we see a certain degree of cause and effect reality, good enough for what we're trying to do most of the time. When my perception does not agree with the cause and effect reality on the planet, then I blithely step out into the world and I fall down because I didn't see the step. I joke with someone thinking that they would enjoy my company and find them stony-faced because I was not aware that they don't like me. And I don't remember an incident that they remember where they are holding a grudge and they do not want to have an interaction with me. So there's my perception, which is I can't remember a grudge and I enter a conversation. There is a reality, which means that the other person has perhaps a different point of view. Or just because I don't see the step doesn't make the step disappear. And the effect of the step will still affect me. But I may not know what hit me. I may be completely confused about what happened because I did not see reality. I was living in the bubble of walking straight without having any regard for anything. This begins to sound banal. It is not. Skill building is like becoming a child again, in that children, when they are so-called playing, are learning skills, important skills. They are working extremely hard when they are playing. They are building muscles. They are building nerve pathways. They are building mind-body coordination skills. They are seeing and perceiving and pretending and emulating social structures to the degree they can see them. So they're working very, very hard in their play to build skills that they will be able to take advantage of as they grow. I think people underestimate spiritual work. They think they can start off at the high level of skill that they are at professionally or socially. But when we enter a new arena of learning, of work of any kind, it's good to take a humility pill. It's good to be humble about entering a new process because it may involve skills that you have not yet developed. So what I am suggesting is to allow this one lecture, these 3 different aspects to begin to see them more fully, more deeply. First of all, what you perceive, which means you need to see what you aren't perceiving. Secondly, what is real. Now, how can we see what is real if we can't see it? I gave two silly examples. Number one, I stepped forward and I did not see the step down or the step up, and therefore I trip over it. That's feedback. That's real life feedback. If it's real and I am not connected to reality, there will be I don't quite know what to call this. There will be an impact of some kind. There is real world feedback to what you don't see. What we're talking about here is on a far more subtle level, which means you need to be more aware. So the second example of my starting a conversation with someone with an expectation of being met, and then suddenly feeling unmet and hostility, an energy of hostility, requires that I see the reality that includes their previous experience of me that I may not have filed away in my memory bank. I may not have realized that I was insulting or rude or arrogant. And yet they did, and they're holding it. So it's not that I can't access it, but I haven't accessed it. And I'm going in as if there's no memory of this difficult interaction, and they're holding that. Reality is all three. Reality is the juxtaposition of different people's perceptions and how that interacts. It's similar to the pavement and the step. Just because I don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If I see it, then I can navigate it. I can integrate reality with my perception. I can remind myself to look down occasionally and make sure that the ground is even where I am walking. So, 3 levels of reality. Keep repeating this because it's a 1, 2, 3 process. First, what I perceive. Secondly, what is cause and effect on the earth plane or energetic or spiritual, depends on where you're working. The third level of reality is what is possible. Going back to the 2 banal examples. If I don't see the step and I trip over it, what is possible is that I change my behavior so that I use my peripheral vision to keep things in mind and am more aware. And what is possible is that I don't make a fool of myself and fall down in public or hurt myself. That's what's possible. By insisting on my own perception, I will guarantee more falls and tumbles. In the second example with people, if I start interacting with someone and I see a reaction from them that I do not expect or do not understand, if I just pause in that moment and say, what's possible here? What might they remember that I forgot? And I might be able to recall a previous interaction and allow that, even though I thought it was pleasant, they may not. I'm trying to find some meeting ground here, some way of bringing the 2 perspectives into alignment so that we may have different responses to a reality, but at least we're responding to a reality instead of my simply saying, I don't understand what your problem is, and your interaction strikes me as freaky and I'm going to leave. I allow for the possibility of their reality, my reality, and there might be a meeting ground, some truth in both at that point. One of the principles that's very handy for this kind of analysis is the concept of the grain of truth. So there may be a grain of truth in my wanting to interact with someone. I may have behaved in an angry or arrogant fashion, but not actually have held that strong a position. I just came across that way. They may not be as hurt or angry as they are expressing themselves, but they may have a bit of hurt or anger. If I allow that they have a different point of view and they weren't met the last time we interacted, and they allow for the possibility that they are overreacting in this tiny example, then we can find a place where we can meet, where I allow for their feelings and their reactions without necessarily having to determine right or wrong. With that, we can go forward and we can try to see what else is there for the two of us. So this whole section was just one piece, which is 3 levels of reality. Now I'm going to go into another triad, which is higher self, lower self, and mask. It's the title of Pathwork Lecture 14. There are many other lectures that deal with various aspects of higher self, lower self, and mask, but it's outlined in the lecture with that title. Higher self, lower self, and mask. There's a description in one of Susan Thasenga's books. She wrote The Undefended Self, and she had a diagram in one of the first editions that I loved, and it was simply 3 concentric circles. I like simplicity. It can get a point across very powerfully, whereas subtlety is sometimes confusing. So 3 concentric circles. Your real self, higher self, is in the middle, your divine kernel, the center of your being. The lower self surrounds you, and then the mask holds everything in. Think of it like a stone fruit, where you've got the divine kernel and you've got the pulpy bit, and then you've got the outer covering. As a concept in Pathwork, once again, I like being simplistic. I like being simple. I like being direct. It isn't silly to me. I can accept that it is silly to talk about it this way. It's also very useful. If you think of this like a peach, and you think of how when a peach has a skin on it, it protects the pulpy bit from exterior stuff. And when pierced, dirt and debris and bacteria can enter. So it is important for the skin to be whole. That's the positive. But in this example, the pulpy bit surrounding the kernel is actually lower self. It's negative energy, pretense, fear, solutions, forcing currents, all kinds of currents that are attempting to resolve stresses. And the mask keeps people from seeing the process. It is a mask. So it's, in other words, if it's sausage making, it's a common analogy in politics that politics is like making sausage. You don't want to see the process. It's not appetizing. You just want to eat the stuff, not realize what it's made of. The mask covers the lower self with the intention of hiding its process and presenting a finished product to the world so that it protects the process from being addressed or analyzed, attacked, keeps it from being vulnerable. The dilemma is this process, the juicy part of the fruit, needs to be analyzed. It needs to be examined. It may need to be dissolved. But the mask is only intended to protect it. So the higher self wishes to enter the world. It is covered up by these processes, by these fears and concerns that aren't real. And the skin, the mask, protects that process from being revealed so that it is difficult to dissolve the negativity, negative energies. So once again, you've got a triad, how to work with this. It goes to the next lecture that was mentioned in 193, which was the idealized self. The mask is a picture of what we should look like. It's the equivalent of put on a happy face. I was raised in a family where a happy face was deemed appropriate, and a sour face was not appreciated. This is a very simple and easy way to visualize the mask in our society, in our families, in our intimate relationships. There are bad days and good days. There are days when we're not in the mood to be happy, we don't feel happy. And put on a happy face is like being slapped with a mask and being forced to pretend to be something you're not. It's painful, and it is not true. However, when we are real, it makes people nervous. So there's a collusion going on that everybody should be happy, and if somebody's not happy, they need to be cheered up. So the first person who breaks the facade of the game, the first person who doesn't do what everybody else is doing, is addressed by the other people. And they say, oh, no, 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 no. You're not happy. We have to fix you because everybody needs to be happy. So there's a reality to a reluctance to not participate. In other words, we don't like not participating in masks, because if we don't, we're going to get a lot of attention directed at us. It's a dynamic in society that served older. Let me see if that's the right word. Guide very often talks about beginning of civilization, medieval times, last couple of centuries, and today. There was a phase of human development, let's say it was thousands of years, a phase of human development where developing community was more important than individuation. Individuation was dangerous to a society that was trying to get on its feet and operate together. Today we have the opportunity to enjoy individuation to a degree that would have been harmful in previous centuries. But we were all taught by our parents, who were taught by their parents, who were in the situation where we all need to work this out together. So it is important to consider that a lot of our habits and tendencies are actually coming from a time that is over, that is not necessarily relevant today. It makes us all pioneers, which sounds like fun, except pioneers go out where there are no maps. Pioneers go try to find the past, and they may make wrong turns and starve to death and die and fall off cliffs. So being a pioneer is an adventure, but it's a risky adventure. We can make false moves, we can make false steps. In the past, that might have jeopardized our families, jeopardized our finances, jeopardized society's ability to operate. So there was a lot of pressure to get everybody on board. We have a luxury today where if you want to follow your own path, there's no reason why you shouldn't. You won't be endangering your community. You won't necessarily be endangering your family. You can be financially responsible with a lower paid job in a less corporate or less profit oriented or less stressful or. We can adjust our jobs and still be fed, be clothed, have reasonable accommodation for our desires. Checking in on this. Yeah, I don't want to, I was going to zoom in. These concepts are all intermixed. It's hard to talk about one without the other. So I could smell going into unity and duality, and I want to save that. So higher self, lower self, and mask. The mask is intended to not disrupt people around us, to say, yes, I'm on board. Yes, I'm with you. This work is individual. This work is about bringing out our individual divine kernel, which may or may not agree with society. It's a different process than the majority of people have gone through in the past. Without saying that it's the way it ought to be, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there's an ability here for anybody who to pick up lectures and read about this, or lectures, spiritual work of all kinds, and do work that used to be reserved for the very, very highest levels of religious theocratic organizations. Hidden libraries, hidden abilities, secret teachers, things that rich people used to go find a guru or a master to teach them. We can find in our libraries. We can find online. And so this luxury is available to us on the most incredibly democratic levels. But our society is not prepared for people to have different philosophical viewpoints. They don't know how to integrate that into a room, into an organization. So what I'm speaking of here, higher self, lower self, and mask, is that there's a tendency for the mask to to exist for multiple reasons. One is an uncertainty of being an individual in society and allowing these questions to come back and forth. Secondly, to contain the lower self because the lower self does not want to be found. So the idea is that if we dissolve the mask, use it when we have to, use it as appropriate, like wearing clothing. You wear casual clothes with your friends and more formal clothing with business associates or out with other people. And you mix and match your clothing as appropriate to different ventures, and you're naked with certain people and not with others. The idea that the divine kernel is not meant to be in all situations with all people. So there's not a problem with putting a, if you want to call it a mask, but a layer of protection between you and others periodically. The idea is that we don't know we're doing this at all. We don't know we're in the mask. It's not a matter of I've had my mask on too long. It's a matter of what mask. So again, we're talking about raising awareness is more important than anything else. Once you raise awareness, then you will do what you need to do with your divine kernel, your lower self, your mask. The trick is to become aware of it. The next lecture that was mentioned was the Idealized Self Image. This is a little bit easier for some people to understand. Idealized Self Image, if you think of Idealized Self Image as your best outfit in your closet, that when we wear that, we feel fully in charge, fully integrated with society. We declare our status, we declare our tastes and preferences, and it allows us to be in society and insulated at the same time. But that's not who we are all the time. You can have Sunday best in your closet, but you don't want to wear it every day. The idealized self-image is it's made up of your ideals, but we aren't our ideals every minute of every day. When the mask becomes the ideal, then we become bad every time we don't meet those ideals. Instead of seeing those as goals, and yes, that's where I would like to be, that I want to move in that direction, we turn it into the next lecture that is mentioned, which is Pathwork Lecture 143, which is Unity and Duality. It becomes all or nothing. Either we are our ideal self or we are bad. So right, wrong, good, bad, night, day, black, white. We divide. Once again, in previous millennia, it was important to differentiate. Differentiation was a miracle. It was a massive leap in human consciousness to be able to differentiate. And to do that, like children, we have to take a meat cleaver and just whack something down the middle. So good, bad, no in between. Right, wrong. Yes, no. Forward, backwards. While that may have been a developmental necessity, not only for civilization and the human species, but also for individuals, because I guess it's okay if you have a right-wrong reality when you're 2. And now we're speaking as adults, and we don't realize how that still grips us, how we still simplify the complexity of life by putting things in camps. So the way I explain this is the way the guide explains it. I have a different style, but it's the same message. One camp is the good is always life affirming. It's life. The bad is deadly, dangerous, or death. So ultimately, you're dividing things into life or death. Now, we don't usually see the full choice because we're not able to stand back and see the whole picture. So it can be easier. I use my body. I'm kinesthetic. I can feel energy and I can feel movement. By feeling forward, backwards, I can sense that I want to fight, or I want to hide, or I want to cower. Life is what you run towards, and death is what you avoid at all costs. You may have a little bit of a visibility or ability to verbalize or understanding of one or the other. You may not see both as clearly. Take what you have. See if you can distill any aspect in a conflict that you have in your life of what you're running away from. And I feel it as what's behind me that I'm moving away from, or what's in front of me that I'm reaching for. If you're reaching for something, you have decided it was life. If you're avoiding something, you have decided that it is deadly. My favorite example of this is Romeo and Juliet. They weren't trying to kill themselves. They interpreted life and death differently than their parents do. Quite true of many adolescents. Life as their parents presented it would be separation from each other, which they considered death. But if they died, there was a possibility that they would be reunited. And that meant life. So while to the parents, the children died, to the children, they entered a different reality where they were allowed to live according to their desires, which was life. What I find that people do is something like that. I have a way of describing that. I take my hand like symbolizing an hourglass and flip it over. We misinterpret what is life affirming. If we think that death is life affirming, we reach for death. If we aren't aware of what we have done, we're calling it life, but you can realize how this gets complicated. We're calling it life, but it's actually death. And so it creates negative situations. And we can't understand because we have this concept of life behind it. So take the silly example of Romeo, not silly, obviously brilliant literature. Take the example of Romeo and Juliet and see that as if we misinterpret or reinterpret life and death as the opposite of what they really are. That can explain sometimes why we are doing things that appear negative and we don't understand them, but we cannot prevent ourselves from going in that direction. Once again, you will never be attracted by death unless you have reinterpreted it as life. So those are some of the major concepts that were left over after I did the first batch of stuff in Pathwork Lecture 193. I'm going to play with virtual realities, play a little bit of catch up and do February and March on these concepts. I hope you read the lectures. They are fascinating. The study guides are intended to be a stepping stone. If you're not quite sure what the lecture is, I partly go through and I eliminate side, it's like going through a movie. Let me digress here. I'm a movie fan and I have DVR editing equipment. And so years and years ago, I began to realize that sometimes when I would watch a film or a TV episode, I was fascinated by a point made in what they call the B plot. So the main plot was heading along and the writers put in this interesting philosophy or philosophical aspect into what is termed the B plot in a story. And when I would explain it to people, they had not seen the B plot. They were watching the A plot, didn't see the B. So I used my DVR editing equipment to chew out the majority of the movie and only leave the B plot. Now, in an hour and a half movie, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 20 minutes. that was this particular arc of story. And I found that if I edited it out, and so these scenes happened one after the other, it was much, much easier to see or to demonstrate to others what I saw. That's what I'm suggesting that you do as exercises, and that's what I try to do with the study guides. I try to edit out, not that I want you not to read the lectures. My first preference would be that you read the lectures. But if you get lost in the lectures and you can't figure out exactly what is being discussed, what I do is I try to condense it down and throw out a lot of intervening explanation and highlight the basic points of the lecture. Sometimes that helps, and then you go back in and read the lecture and have a better idea of what's going on. I think that's all any teacher does, is allow people access, and then they can peruse at their convenience. So it is my hope that I can do that or have done that. Skip the study guide, go straight to the lecture. Thank you for listening. Take care. Please be safe. Blessings upon you and your families and your loved ones and your communities during this time of quarantine. Take care.